Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
My name's Billy. I'm an alcoholic. And by the grace of God and Alcoholics Anonymous, I haven't found it necessary to take a drink since January the 5th of 1990. My home group's a Design for Living Big Book Study Group in Neptune, New Jersey. And, well, first let me reach out to my people. If you're here tonight, if you're new, if you hate AA, if you don't believe in God, if you hate some guy in a suit and tie who looks like a yuppie talking to you, you're my kind of people, okay? There is absolutely no requirement to come to AA to like AA. There's no requirement to believe in anything. There's no requirement that you have to go to meetings with people in suits and ties. I just happen to have one on tonight. I want to thank the other speakers. I want to thank the committee. I always joke around that AA service is interesting. I'm pretty sure that, I guess, 364 or 3 or 2 days ago, the last one of these happened, or probably within 10 days or so. So I know that there's been a group of people who for the last 364 or 5 days have been working their butts off to put this on. The downside of that is I know that there's a whole other group of people in our fellowship. They have not worked one day, however, have made it known to the people who worked for the last 365 days what they could have done better. And that is just part of our fellowship. That is just who we are. I'd love to tell you it's different anywhere else. I won't spend a lot of time. I do have the great honor and privilege of serving as a non-trustee director on the AA World Services Board. And what I would say about that is the greatest honor and privilege of that is what I get from it, not what I give to it, and also to be associated with the 80 men and women that work there every day. And not only, probably some of you in the audience have maybe met some of our alcoholic employees, the general manager or our director of publications or the 11 staff members we have, but there's a group of 60 or so men and women that are not members of our fellowship, that are just die-hard great employees that every day go to work at 475 Riverside Drive. And it's an honor to work with them and to know the work they do behind the scenes. And, sometimes it sounds boring when we talk about, because the General Service Office in New York really doesn't do 12-step work. It facilitates 12-step work. And I always like to pass on one story just so, if you've ever been there, if you haven't, I hope you have. It's funny. When I'm outside of the Northeast, I meet more people that have been there. It's kind of like I grew up in New York and never went to the Statue of Liberty until I lived in Chicago. So it's interesting that I meet more people outside of New York that have been to the General Service Office than I do in New York. But if you go to 475 Riverside Drive and you go in the elevator and you push the 11th floor button and you get off on the 11th floor and the doors open, the first thing you see is the Serenity Prayer in a bunch of different languages hanging on the wall around our circle and triangle, and a reception desk. And I just want to tell a quick story that maybe people don't get, when you put I don't even like to say, whatever you put in the basket, what you could afford to put in the basket, sometimes I hear people say, well, where does that money go? What happens to that money? It's all politics. I hear all kinds of things. And let me just pass on a real story, that when someone writes from a correctional facility for a big book, we do all we can to send them a softcover big book if they don't have one. And with that, there's always a letter. And the letter changes over time, but I'll paraphrase the last sentence that's always on it, which always says to the male or female who wrote the office, hey, by chance, if you ever get out, you find yourself in New York, please stop by and say hello. And so last February, some guy showed up at 475 Riverside Drive. He pushed the 11th floor button and went up to the receptionist. And when he got to the receptionist, he took out his letter that he got in a Massachusetts State Prison in 1998. And he said, hey, you know, I got this letter from this guy, Doug. And he said that if I was ever here to stop by and say hello. And so I want to say hello to this guy, Doug, because I've been sober since I've been in prison. I've remained a good member of Alcoholics Anonymous. So people never really get to hear those stories. You know, but that's what happens with the dollars that go in the basket. I always like to talk about three things quickly because I can joke around a little bit, you know. I just spoke in Houston. I know there are a couple of people who were here, and I really appreciate the flexibility the committee gave me with the storm, because it was horrific where I live, and my work is very involved to a point, and it's interesting. Here's what I'll say about the storm. I found it very much like Alcoholics Anonymous. The closer to the devastation I was, the more compassionate and human people were, like almost being at a low-bottom clubhouse. Get a couple of miles away from the devastation, all of a sudden people are fighting over gas. Almost like what goes on in a low-bottom clubhouse, and then people stay sober for a little while, and all they do is make fun of the people in the low-bottom clubhouse, except they all got sober at the low-bottom clubhouse. AA is an interesting place when you think about it. Sometimes you could drive yourself crazy of the paradoxes in Alcoholics Anonymous. But there are three things I never like to forget about when I talk, because you can't keep everybody happy when you talk. I joked around in Houston, you know, I love sitting in the back of a speaker meeting at a conference. I'll tell you why. Because you have your no drunkalog people, you have your big book study people, you have your service fanatics, you have every different demographic, and you could never keep them happy. Some people talk too much about God, then they say they didn't talk enough, or their drinking story was too long, and all I know is when I sit in the back of that room and a speaker meeting ends at a convention, I'll hear one person come by me, and they'll say, that was the worst speaker I've ever heard in my life. And 5 people later, I'll hear someone say, man, I'm really glad I came tonight. I was really questioning whether I even need to be in AA. Well, that speaker told my story. And so I've had to learn a hard lesson in AA about being in the judgment game, because my family passes down a lot of things. I grabbed this Alcoholism, the Family Disease. I love this Al-Anon pamphlet. I didn't know my mother wrote a story. I am both the mother of an alcoholic and an ex-wife of an alcoholic. I divorced my husband but couldn't divorce my daughter. That's my mom's story. I mean, that's her story. I could read on. I went through all the well-known useless attempts tried by with those alcoholics. I wept, I scolded, I tried to reason, I tried to bribe, I withheld favors. I could end there. We have a nice way of closing, folks. I mean, I come from the family disease of alcoholism. Deb talked about it today. I come from the horrible family disease of alcoholism. And I like to say early on that I have great respect for the AA podium, both in the language I use and anything I say, but I also say that you can't leave here tonight and go to Barnes & Noble and get my family's guidebook on raising a healthy family, because we have no business writing that book. And so there may be some things I talk about that sound disrespectful, and I only tell them not for shock value, but I want to be honest about where I come from, or about how I was taught to live, or our view of the rest of the world. And judgment is, we excel at judgment in my family. And I just want to tell you a little story before I mention those three things, in that I spent a good amount of time in AA judging everybody. And I spent a lot of time in New York City in the early 90s, sober. And if you went to New York City meetings on the Upper West Side in Zone 6, you would have known that there was a gentleman who always stood in the back of the room, who always wore a fake mink coat down to his ankles, even in August. If you remember the old boombox, I know I'm dating myself, but he had a boombox with no batteries that he carried on his shoulder, and he danced a lot in the back of meetings, and it drove certain people crazy, probably me at times too. And it's funny because in 2002, when I returned to New York, I was on a subway dressed like this with a couple of guys from work going to a meeting in Midtown, going to downtown to another meeting. And the subway door opened up, and who walks through? I won't say this gentleman's name. He deserves anonymity as much as I do. But who comes through the door? And anyone who's run the New York City subways, there's always some grand announcement or musician or whatever. They need a couple of dollars, and he came through the door. Ladies and gentlemen, I need a couple of dollars. And he made it through the crowd, and he looked at me, and he goes, "Hey, Billy, what's up?" And I said, "Hey, how you doing?" And the three guys I'm with from work are like, "What is going on here?" You know, like, how does Billy really know this guy that's obviously homeless? And we had a quick interchange, me and him. But last month in December, the AA World Services meeting has every December meeting. And the night before, I particularly did not go into bed in a good frame of mind. I had something bothering me. And I knew that we had a meeting the next day, and I wanted to be in the right frame of mind for that meeting. And I know what to do. Then I go to a morning meeting. And so there was a morning meeting close by, not too far from the general service office. And when I walked in there, who was sitting in the front row but this person with 3 years of sobriety, living now in a transitional Salvation Army home. And I tell that story because I'm judgmental to the bone. And what business do I have judging anybody? It's just not. As you know, Bill writes it best in the 12 Traditions essays, in the Grapevine articles, that we are not in the position of judge, jury, and executioner. That is not our job. Our job is to make sure the hand's there when the person asks for help. And so the three things I don't like to forget to talk about are, one, Al-Anon. Because I could tell you that but for the grace of Alcoholics Anonymous, but truth is, but for the grace of the Worldwide Fellowship of Al-Anon Family Groups, you would have a different speaker tonight. If my mom hadn't learned to get out of the way of the bottom that her oldest son's God had planned for him, you would have a different speaker. You know, sometimes I tell newcomers, you might find me in the backyard smoking a cigar across my kitchen picnic table with a newcomer. That's my favorite way to go through the big book, in my backyard with a cigar lit. And I always tell young guys sometimes, the greatest thing about reading the big book is you get to know what AA is and what AA isn't. Because you can hear a lot of things in meetings or from people that's just not AA. You know, I used to hear a lot, nothing worse than a belly full of booze and a head full of AA. That's not my story. Not even close. In fact, when I start drinking, I could care less about AA. Let me give last night's speaker a quick resentment for his ride home. I know he spent a lot of time on it, but I'm a great drinker, okay? A great drinker. Always been a great drinker. What does that mean? It means I've worn drinking as a badge of honor on my arm for so long. It means that from the time I was 12 or 13 years old, I could sit down at your parents' kitchen table, and you could be a senior on the football team, and I could be in 7th or 8th grade, and I will bounce a quarter off a table, and I will go shot for shot with you playing quarters until you're 100 pounds heavier than me and you pass out first. Like, I know what it's like to be raised to drink. Unfortunately, I come from a family that doesn't believe in alcoholism. That's the real problem for me. My family doesn't believe in the disease I suffer from. It's kind of like having cancer and going home and your family saying, well, we don't believe in chemotherapy or radiation because you really don't have cancer. Well, my family does not believe in alcoholism. Now, through a little generational change, we do. My family's so crazy that if that white glass were a Budweiser, that white cup, and I was sipping it, not all drinking in my family counts as really drinking, which is even crazier than not believing in alcoholism. Drinking in my family means you're on a mission. It means that you have a place in mind. You might not know where that is, but it means that you're going out to get hammered. It means you're going out and I'm going to listen to Ozzy and Sabbath and Floyd, and I am going all night and all morning until my body gives in. That's drinking in my family. And Al-Anon, I always say there's nothing worse than a belly full of booze and your mom's head full of Al-Anon. If you're a teenage alcoholic, that's the real curse, you know? But I say that because you hear things that aren't AA. The Storm's a perfect example. I did call a bunch of conferences in November and December. And I had to say, listen, I can't come. And I had to do that because I'm a worker among workers. I had to do that because the people in my company were making sacrifices, people above me and people on the org chart that are below me. And I've been taught by great male and female leaders that you don't ask people to do things that you're not willing to do yourself. So while somebody might say I had an AA commitment, my book makes clear what's most important. What's most important is what's at home. What's most important is that company that takes care of me and allows me to participate in AA, that when the chips were down in November and December, that I do that. End of story. And, you know, there's that saying I hear in meetings sometimes, another great one, of my worst day sober is better than my best day drinking. I don't know who made that up. That's not my story, I assure you. I'm not really sure who those people drank with. I respect it, but it's not my story. If they're talking about the big book that says I would not trade the life of today for the life of yesteryear, well, then I believe that. If you're asking me to compare checking into a correctional facility sober compared to spring break Fort Lauderdale 1986, I'm going to tell you those 2 days don't even come close in comparison. I will tell you which day I would rather relive, and it is not the one on this side of the timeline, I assure you. So I always tell the guys I take through the big book, it's not my job to diagnose you an alcoholic. It's not my job to tell you how to dress. It's not my job to tell you a lot of things. It's my job to take you through this book, if that's what you would like to do, and let you go through so that you can make the spiritual conclusion as to whether you suffer from this thing, this malady, this disease, this allergy we call alcoholism, or you don't. And if you don't, I would applaud your answer. It's not my job to diagnose. And so Al-Anon really forced me, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit more. But then I want to talk about ICYPA, the International Conference of Young People in AA, because the International Conference of Young People in AA changed my life. I learned how to negotiate contracts, negotiating the ICYPA hotel contracts. I learned how to dress for business meetings based on the ICYPA hotel contracts. I remained active in general service as a result of young people's conferences and service there. And, you know, sometimes I hear people say that, you know, young people's isn't AA or all kinds of stuff. And I think around now, I go through my head and I think, boy, the current delegate from Georgia, he was the chair of ICYPA after me. The youngest delegate at the conference last year from North Carolina, 34 years old, she came up through ICYPA. And then I go back to what Bill wrote. So I am so grateful for ICYPA. Whether somebody wants to tell me, I mean, I was lucky. I didn't get sober in a place where people made fun of my age or put me down. I know that happens in places, but for the most part, and I'm the same believer as Deb. Young people like me, I don't do good with a sponsor in my own age group. I need somebody a little higher. I don't know why that is, whether it's a peer thing or not. And the other thing I just want to talk about quickly is service. That service in Alcoholics Anonymous, it's a three sides of that triangle. And, you know, the service structure of Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, I like to say, sometimes people confuse it. It's not here for all us here tonight. We're all important. I don't want to, if you have 1 day or 55 years, you're important. But the service structure is for the people not here yet. That's why we have it. That's why it's there, to make sure the doors are open, to make sure those meeting directories are printed, to make sure the website stays updated. So I ask myself that question all the time because I'm a chronic teenage alcoholic. And I like to ask myself all the time, what would have happened on January the 6th of 1990 if AA didn't exist? Because an old-timer asked me to think about that one time. He said, Billy, where would you have gone on January the 6th of 1990 if there was no AA? And he explained to me that AA hadn't been around that long. You can act like it's been around a long time. But in 1910, they were doing lobotomies on alcoholics. They were making women get sterilized as a condition to be released from treatment centers. Like, that's the same century I was born. Like, what would have happened on January the 6th? Would I be here today? I tend to doubt it. You know, I tell people, if you go in my home, I was joking around with some people today about this, but if you go in my home, there's one section where I have a lot of AA stuff, but in my main living room, there's nothing AA there. Except there's one book on my coffee table. It's a Time magazine special book published in 2000 called The 80 Days That Changed the World in the 20th Century. And if you go 13 days into that book, on Mother's Day 1935, it states, on this day, a stockbroker from New York met a surgeon from Akron and founded what is today known as Alcoholics Anonymous. From that, many 12-step groups have grown and millions of lives have been changed. Like that date, if you go a couple of pages further to see what it's compared to, like Jackie Robinson playing in the major leagues, like the wall coming down, like Martin Luther King's I Had a Dream speech, like you can go look at the other days, the other 80 that were picked. That's how significant a group of people not in AA found AA. And I think about that all the time. Now, I already heard one person mention Chuck C., who is one of my ultimate idols. And I want to tell you, because I don't like to make fun of speakers or put speakers down. I really don't try to do that. I like to humble myself by really what it is to be speaking at an AA podium, or what really catches newcomers. Because Chuck told a story of being in Southern California and going to speak at a local group. And when he got there, somebody told him that there was a guy across the room at his first meeting. And Chuck, honestly, in this talk I listened to, talks about the alcoholic ego, about what he said to himself. Boy, I really got to hit it out of the park tonight. I got this guy's life resting in my very hands. And so he speaks that night, and as he's driving home, he's saying to himself, damn, I hit it out of the park. And so about a year and a couple months later, he goes back to that same group to speak again. And who's there but the guy who had one day the year before? And so he admits to himself that his alcoholic ego, he immediately started talking to himself again and said, I knew I hit it out of the park. Like, I knew I gave the real message that night. But then he goes further, because a lot of the speakers have already talked about our ability to think is not really an ability. It's kind of a ability should never be used in the same sentence for me as think. That he says to himself, I need to find out the exact sentence I said that night. I need to know the words. What were those magic words? And so after the meeting, he goes up and talks to the guy. And he says, hey, I was here at your first meeting last year. And the guy says, oh. He says, I'm really curious. He goes, I'd really like to know what got you to your next meeting. Like, what made you stay? And the guy looked right at him and said, I was so out of it, I don't even remember who spoke. I don't even know if it was a man or a woman. But he goes on further to say, but I had burned every bridge. I had destroyed every relationship in my family. And I was sitting at a table in the back, and I ran out of cigarettes, and a woman next to me gave me a cigarette and lit it for me. And that was the first nice thing anyone had done for me in a long time, because I had burned so many bridges. I love that Chuck C. story, because it lets me know that what I say is kind of really unimportant, and for me, the most unimportant hour of the weekend. But for how one of you interact with somebody outside in that hallway, or in a hospitality room, or there's somebody who's not going to come up on the thank you speaker line, or there's someone who thinks that AA isn't working for them. I know it's common in a lot of places in this country to say, who's counting days? In New York, we ask, who's counting days, 1 to 90. I hear other places, who's in their first 30 days? I worry about who's in their last 30 days. Who's in their first 30 days is easy to recognize. We ask those people to even self-identify. Who's in their last 30 days is an art to be able to identify those people. And, I always say that what I love the most about Alcoholics Anonymous for my own recovery, because I can't take you through the 12 steps tonight. I can tell you a little bit of my story, how insane my family is. I can tell you some of that. But I'm so grateful to Bill Wilson for two things. I'm grateful for, number one, that he conveyed the message, along with Dr. Bob, that for a hopeless person, there is only one person qualified to work with them. And that is someone who's been equally as hopeless, but has found a way out. That's really what Bill and Bob came up with. And number two that they came up with, which the speakers have already talked about, but is totally my story. I mean, if you've been sober as long as I have, the one thing I can tell you is I've made a lot of bad decisions since January the 5th of 1990. Okay? A lot. It's amazing that I made them not drinking. I don't know about anyone else, but when you first come into AA, you can't imagine ever not drinking again. But what about when you look in the mirror at 5 or 6 years sober and you realize, thank God I don't drink. Like the decisions I make are bad enough. I can't even imagine that I used to get through life like this with drinking. But Bill so clearly tells us in that book that the man or woman who makes the decision after they take the first drink is not the same person who makes decisions before they take that first drink. That's my story. My whole childhood, I was always coming back to AA on Sunday night. It always seemed like a good time to come back to AA right after whatever high school weekend parties were going on. I've never made it back to AA on Sunday night. It's never happened till now. I don't come back on Sunday night. I come back months later. I come back a year later. And what I've had to identify in my life, and as I tell my story, I'm going to let you know that there's 2 lines in the big book that I feel that I live between. And sometimes it's a hard reality for me to look at those 2 lines. There's one found in More About Alcoholism that says, at the end of a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon, I was crossing a hotel lobby, and I picked up a drink. I thought it was a good idea. I cross a lot of hotel lobbies. But I also know this, that I came to AA the blame game, that something else outside, like my crazy family, was causing me to be an alcoholic. That story, it's kind of incredible when you think about it. Because I love when people get out of treatment, and I'm not putting down treatment. I believe in our traditions. We cooperate with everyone. But I always kind of laugh to myself when I see the trigger sheet. You know, when it says, don't do this when you get out. And I know why, because those people don't have a foundation yet. They haven't had a spiritual experience. But I kind of laugh when I see, don't hang out with your old friends, don't go to the crack house, don't go to bars, don't do this. It's almost like there should be a line on there, whatever you do, don't have a perfect day, right? Because my book tells me that it doesn't matter externally what's going on. It could be a perfect day, and my brain will tell me it's a good idea to pick up a drink. Now, the converse point of that for me in the big book is in Bill's story. Probably the line I might despise the most. Because it says, only through work and self-sacrifice can the alcoholic survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. And I'm a big book thumper. I've always believed that Bill used words for a certain reason. He doesn't say a few of us will have trials and low spots. He doesn't say 1 out of 4. He says all of us will have trials and low spots ahead. What's unfortunate about that, and leads me into describing me as a teenager, is he says the way to get through it is work and self-sacrifice. So I have to tell you, those were not how you would describe me in junior high. I did not come here with a lot of DNA wired for work and self-sacrifice. You know, the guys I looked up to had 3 goals in life: get drunk, pick up chicks, and avoid work at all costs. Like, that was more my kind of living. Those were the people that I looked up to. Not work and self-sacrifice. That sounds horrifically difficult. You know, but I know today that there are certain trials and low spots ahead. I always tell newcomers, you know, I know your life is really hard right now, but what I can guarantee you is there is somebody with 10, 20, 30 years sobriety whose life is just as hard right now because of what's going on in their life. I can guarantee you that. You just don't have that foundation. And, you know, the family I come from, I loved some of the family, you know, some of the talks this weekend about the family disease. I come from that family. My dad, an untreated whatever. I can't call him an alcoholic. He died of the family liver disease, so I'll give a safe description, okay? I can't diagnose him. He died of the family hereditary liver disease. He was an undercover narcotics cop, a maniac, violent, unstable, and everybody loved him. Hero of the neighborhood. As long as you didn't live with him, you loved him. If you lived with him, you were afraid of him. That's the way it went. That is the way it went. And I'm just like Deb, same thing. You can be fearful or you can be angry. I noticed a long time ago, anger is just a lot easier. It looks better. It's cooler to be angry than afraid. Let's just face it. My problem my whole life is being cool. And it's cool to be angry. My mom, for most of my childhood, was an untreated Al-Anon, untreated codependent. Her job was to put a tent around this circus called 52 West Drive and to give everyone outside of it the appearance that there is nothing wrong inside. And where I come from, and I don't put my mom or dad down, I buried them both with as much dignity and grace as I think any sober man could have. But I know this, that I one time repeated what happened in the middle of the night on the way to school. The kid, when he went home that night, he told his mom. His mom ran into my mom in a shopping center. His mom asked my mom if everything was okay at home, and my mom probably said something like, "Why would you even ask?" And she said, "Well, my son came home, and he says, Billy said this is what happened last night." So when my dad came home from work, my mom told my dad. And then he beat the hell out of me. That's just the way it goes where I come from. I'm not putting my dad down. I'm not saying I got beat, that made me an alcoholic. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying I come from the family disease of alcoholism. The life skills I was given are not like get along with the rest of the world, all right? They were, don't trust anybody. We hang out with Irish Catholics. And then we even only hang out with Irish Catholic cops, firemen, electricians, pipe fitters, steel erectors. You know, we have our own little subculture. And the other thing that I loved that one of the other speakers said is, my dad taught me from a young age, we drink and they drug. It's that simple. What we do is drink. You do not use drugs. And when I talk about drinking, like I told you, I'm not counting a lot of things. I'm not counting splitting a beer with my dad at a Yankee game. I'm not counting splitting a beer with my dad at a Ranger Islander game. I'm not counting being the bat boy for my dad's softball team. I'm not counting any of that. I'm talking about getting my own 8-pack of Miller, the old small bottles, going into the woods, getting hammered, and getting another 8-pack. That's what I'm talking about. You know, I hear people sometimes say things about young alcoholics and people who are teenage alcoholics, and I wonder, you know, I have no business talking about anyone that drank until they were 60 and what it was like. I only know my story. Because there was a time in my life when I wasn't that bad a son, not that bad a brother, not that bad a student, not that bad an altar boy, not that bad a Boy Scout, not that bad a kid to have on your baseball team, but I hated myself. And then I started drinking. And so within 6 months or a year, that changed 180 degrees. I was a horrible son, a horrible brother, not good in school, not a good Boy Scout, not a good kid to have on your baseball team, but I like myself. And I tell people all the time, because I see 12, 13-year-old kids today, I realize how young that is. But I can tell you right now, my story, my spiritual truth, 13 years of feeling like that was 13 years way too long. And as soon as somebody showed me a way out of feeling like that, I ran with it. And because I'm alcoholic and because I have all the things the big book describes, it doesn't matter what the consequences are. The consequences are less devastating to me than me being uncomfortable in my own skin. So I'll be comfortable in my own skin, and how I do that is by drinking, and I'll accept the consequences. They just come along with the drinking. And, you know, it's interesting. I go to a lot of meetings. I go to meetings in New York City. I love low-bottom meetings. It's unfortunate, but consequences don't get us sober. I wish they did. I'd have a much more successful track record as a sponsor if the consequences in the people I sponsor's lives helped them stay sober, but they don't. I know we've all been to funerals and wakes, but what's even more devastating to me is the people who don't die. Like if I was going to have my own country, my Green Berets and SEAL Team 6 would be all alcoholic. Because even though some of us die, some of us you can't kill. Some of us Some of us, you just keep seeing them putting their hand up at a meeting. You can't believe. And some of them, you look across the room, and they say what just happened, and I say to myself, all right, thank God, they're back safe. That's so horrific, they're never going to drink again. And what happens? 2 weeks later, they drink again. You know, the book is clear about 2 weeks in the past, a month in the past. Consequences are just not what I'm wired about. You know, someone asked me, and I'll tell it quickly, a story about sobriety and consequences and how I equate the two. Because in 1998, 99, I had a knee surgery or two, and a doctor looked me right in the eyes, and he said, Billy, you shouldn't play softball anymore. That's like a guidance counselor looking at me and saying, you shouldn't drink, or a probation officer looking at me and saying, you really can't get arrested again. And I just say, you're right. It's like I told the doctor, you're right. And so I was going to a AA picnic that summer, and I looked down at the field and the grass, and, you know, there was a hat at first base, a squished plate at second base, like a shirt at third base, you know, like just a friendly game among friends. And, you know, if you're new in AA, I can't take you through the steps, but I can tell you one thing. There's no such thing as a friendly game among AA members, okay? It doesn't matter if it's spades, golf, basketball, trivial pursuit, whatever. I meet a lot of people like me. You know who I am? I am a horrible loser and a worse winner. That's who I am, okay? And so I'm walking down to that field, and the only thing that went through my mind was the doctor was talking about league. He wasn't talking about a friendly game among friends. And so I'm in left field not too many hours later, you know, and I don't have to do a public fourth and fifth step here. I can tell you that if you're new, don't let the fourth step scare you out the door. If anything, my 21st fourth step would scare me out the door. I would trade back for that first one in a heartbeat. The one that had no AA members on it, who I didn't have resentments against, who I think wronged me more. So don't let that scare you out the door. Tom I says it great. He always says it's the most important day's work he ever did, even the first one that didn't look that great. But if I was going to open up my fourth step a little bit so that you can get an idea as to the level of sickness, if you're a guy on there, chances are you're good looking or good at sports. Let's just throw that out there for just a general category. If you're a guy and you're not in my family, but you happen to end up on that. So I'm in left field, and there's a guy up at bat. He's really good looking, and he appears to be, even my ego will tell me, almost, I think, as good as me, which is as bad as being better than me. And he hit a wicked line drive to left field, and anyone that's played ball would know that you pick it up on one hop and throw it to second base. And the true story, as crazy and as funny as it could be, is, you know, that night when I walked to the parking lot from that field, you know, I had to take a Ziploc bag that somebody brought hamburgers with and stuff it with ice. I had to take duct tape from some plumber that was there who had his van and wrap it around my knee. My knee was twice the size it should have been, the knee I had surgery on. It was all cut up. I had blood all over my shorts and my knee and my socks. And I was in excruciating pain, limping back to my car. And the only thought that went through my mind was, that may have been the greatest catch I've ever made, right? And I tell you that because the consequences didn't matter. And I tell that story because when I said that I say I'm a great drinker, what comes along with being a great drinker for me is that the next day it doesn't matter what happened. What matters is that I can identify about 20 minutes from the night before where alcohol worked for me, regardless of the consequences that would happen after. And if you're new, I want to stress, you know, Deb talked so good about the first step this morning. I want to stress that if you're new and if you happen to be young like me, and how good it was to have a man walk me through the big book and point out to me why I'm an alcoholic, because most of us, I guess I'll just say about most of the people that I hang out with, I didn't hang out with the choir, okay? So it's not like I had 7 choir members from church and me going out at night, okay? Most of us tend to hang out with all kinds of different people, I'll just say. One would never know. But the fact of the matter is, all the people I hung out with as a kid are an alcoholic. All the people I ever drank with are an alcoholic. You know, it's weird when you're a young alcoholic. It's like you lose certain things in life. Like I've never been able to celebrate my 21st birthday in a bar because I was already drinking there 2 years. So I couldn't come in and have the bartender say, hey, what birthday is? Oh, 21. Wait a minute, you've been here for 2 years, right? So there's certain things that come along with being a young alcoholic, a real practicing chronic alcoholic. But the gift of a sponsor is somebody that could go through my story slowly, really make me talk about my drinking and identify things that made me different from the people I want to say I'm just like. Because maybe I want to listen to certain people and think it was a phase. That happens to a lot of people I know. Life gets good. Slogan Marty in the Bronx always said, there's only one way to coast, and it's not up. But the problem is, we get complacent, and he used to say, you get complacent, you better come place your ass in a chair, you know? And he used to say, you know, we sit down in a chair, it's great when we have nothing because our wallet doesn't rub against our ass and doesn't interfere with the comfort of sitting in that chair because we have nowhere else to go and no money to go anywhere else. But you stay sober a little while, maybe you get an ATM card in your wallet, maybe even get a wallet, starts rubbing against you, telling you, you know, I don't need to go to this meeting tonight. Maybe it was just a bad couple of years as a teenager. And God bless the man who walked me through my first step. I didn't know what a panic attack was, really, maybe not until like 5 or 6 years ago. I don't know when I started to hear that word thrown around a lot. However, I've had them. So let me tell you about the earliest panic attacks I can remember having. And this is one of the things that man pointed out to me. When you're a teenager and you go to parties, if there's going to be 1 keg, you say 5. If there's going to be 5 kegs, people say 10 kegs. It's the exaggeration factor with teenage drinkers. But if I was going to a party and in the back of a car listening to Ozzy with 5 other guys, I would have one of those things that people have described as panic attacks. Because I can't go somewhere without my own alcohol. Like, I can do a lot of things. I can fight myself out of a lot of bad situations. But what I cannot happen is I cannot, at any time during this night while I'm still conscious, run out of alcohol. That's an emergency. And so on the way to that party, I got to convince 4 or 5 other guys that even though we're going to a keg party, I need to go to 7-Eleven. See, I like going to a keg party. I like walking into your mother's backyard with a 6 of Michelob in my hand, and I like to put it in the bushes just as I'm about to turn the corner of that backyard, because I like when I have the keg hose in my hand and my cup tipped. I like knowing in the back of my mind that when this runs out for everybody else, I have my 6 of Michelob. And this man pointed out to me, you know, Billy, a lot of other people don't do that. In fact, the reason they like keg parties is because there's free beer there. Or they pay the $5 and they drink from that. They don't worry about having a backup at a keg party. And the other thing that he pointed out to me is, you know, I love music. I love metal. I'm still a huge metal fan. And I've been to a lot of concerts. And I guess before I just finish this story, I'm going to tell you, if there's anyone new here, if you're like me and you think life sucks sober, if you're like me and you think all your dreams are wiped away, if you're like me and you think that there is nothing that sounds more boring than staying sober a day at a time, I just want to encourage you and let you know that you are in for the ride of your life. You are in for the greatest life God could ever have planned for you. This summer, I went with a bunch of guys. I went to the Wall the first time in 1980 with the original Pink Floyd. I went this year to see Roger Waters at Yankee Stadium do it. bunch of sober guys. There was more people smoking weed there than you could imagine. But I got to tell you, I had the greatest time that night. The greatest time. A couple of years ago, I was there when the Yankees won the World Series. If you would have told me when I was 3 days sober that someday you'll see the Yankees win the World Series, I thought life was over. I thought there was no fun here. And, you know, I would go to concerts as a kid, and, you know, now everything's high tech, you know. They got metal detectors now that are like this big. They can scan a person. Back then, they had the pat-down line. You know, when you had like two big guys and they pat you down. And when I came to AA, let me tell you about my costume at the time. Levi's, black engineer boots, some kind of white thermal sweatshirt in the winter with a black Ozzy, Sabbath, Molly Hatchet, something shirt on, a Levi dungaree jacket with an Ozzy oil painting on the back of it, and every morning I left for school and I took my pack of Marlboro Reds and I stuffed them on the inside of my pants, and I was set for the day. That's how I showed up to AA. In the winter, I had a 3/4 length Army olive drab jacket that had the Who quadrophenia symbol painted on the back of it, and it had lots of contraband pockets. And I can't even tell you how many concerts I didn't get into because I didn't make it through the pat-down line. And this guy who took me through the big book, he said, you know, Billy, he said, what's interesting is, you know those people you talk about when you think maybe this was just a phase? He's like, you know, they all got to hear the music. They went to the concert and actually got in. They did not have a spiritual malady, an allergy, that prevented them, because there's no way I could go into somewhere with 30,000 people and depend on someone else to get me drunk. That's the scariest situation I could ever get myself into. And, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous, Al-Anon, a lot of good professional people. In New York, they have a thing called a person in need of supervision. And there's a lot of ways you can get one of them as a juvenile. You can get one from your parents. You can get one from the police. You can get one from school, whatever. And, you know, it's interesting. I think about my junior high. My junior high, I don't know about where you go to school, but when I was in elementary school, you had one teacher the whole day. And then when you went to junior high, you got to change classes. Big deal where I come from. Means you're really cool. You get 5 minutes between each class. You can burn a cigarette. I mean, whole different scenario. I think I lost that privilege in like 4 months. I went to what was called the resource room, which is where the largest male teacher has the worst kids in school the whole day. And you lose your privilege of switching classes. And if you were in the resource room, you had to see the school counselor. My school counselor was Mr. Pavi, God rest his soul, passed away a while ago. But, you know, I'm a, you know, product of the 70s and 80s, so I love after-school specials, if anyone's in that age group. Always some tragic family member, you know, the anorexic daughter, the alcoholic husband, you know, whatever. And so I had one of those contracts on my refrigerator, you know, that I got from being a person in need of supervision. You know, Billy promises to go to school, to do his homework, to do his chores, not to be late, not to smoke, and then one was to go to AA. And, you know, I always love to talk about my early, you know, because I already talked enough about service and everything, that Mr. Pavi kind of tricked me to go into AA. He said, you know, you might be able to learn a lot about your dad there. And I said, all right. Now, my poor mother, God bless her, God rest her soul. See, because I was too cool. I wouldn't even let her drop me off in front of the movie theater. I would let her drop me off down the street. And there was no way I was going to AA in the same church she went to an Al-Anon meeting. That was not happening. But I can tell you this. AA, well, first of all, it was such a different time. If you were a teenager like me, and everywhere else you went, you got suspended or detention for smoking, it was a smoker's paradise, okay? And it was the only place I ran into adults who encouraged me to light up Marlboros, right? It was the greatest thing in the world, okay? But you see, I loved what Deb said this morning, because you see, if I would have listened to a guy a long time ago So I remember going to an anniversary meeting because someone said, can't wait to the anniversary meeting. And then I heard another person say, can't wait to the anniversary meeting last Friday night of the month. And by this time, I'd been in and out of AA like 2 years, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to go to that anniversary meeting. So I went to that anniversary meeting, and some old woman, like 35 years old, she turned the lights down halfway, right? And then this old guy, like 40 years old, comes out with a sheet cake with candles on it, and they start singing Happy Anniversary. And I'm sitting there thinking, 26, 36, 46, 56, like, so if I even make it to like mid-50s, I'm going to be looking forward to the old lady with the lights halfway down, with the sheet cake, singing happy. Like, I had a lot better ideas for myself. And I would hear people tell their stories, and I agreed that what happened was bad. But I wanted like the last 10 minutes of their story before they hit their bottom. Like, I hadn't had that yet. I had not been to an outdoor heavy metal concert. I wanted that. And this guy pulled me outside a meeting, and I always tell people, if you see me uncomfortable in an AA meeting that I normally attend, it is usually for one reason alone, is that this man pulled me outside a meeting, and he said, Billy, you're a pretty nice kid, but unfortunately, you might be too cool to get sober, and that's unfortunate. See, I didn't know what too cool to be sober looked like then. You see me uncomfortable today in a meeting, it's usually because I'm looking across the room and I see a young guy and I know that he's too cool to be sober. Because when you've been too cool to be sober, it's really easy to spot. See, too cool to be sober is I don't come in to hear the preamble. I never hear the moment of silence and the serenity prayer. I'm outside burning another cigarette. And when I do come in, I'm loud. I have to high five, shake hands, whatever. I can't just sit down. I don't stay for the end of the meeting. The only thing on time, except for this time getting sober, the only thing I was ever on time for in AA was sober softball. Other than that, I'm not on time for anything. And it's unfortunate to be too cool, to have an ego that out of whack. Because I travel a lot for work, and I've traveled for AA, and I know that I don't care whether it's a Denny's, a Waffle House, a pancake house. I don't care where the meeting after the meeting is. There's two tables. There is the cool table and the uncool table. I love my seat at the cool table. That's where I fit in. I'm a bully. I'm a bully wired to be a bully. I'm angry. I like to make fun of people. I like to say things like time doesn't matter, where if you added up all the time at my table and multiplied it by 10, you wouldn't get a year. But I say time doesn't matter. I like to point fingers at that other table, the people who go to the meeting before the meeting, the people who go to the meeting after the meeting, the people who finally learn that, like I said, I love treatment, but I needed to have AA explain to me. I needed to have someone sit down and say, Billy, treatment's great because that's where you're hard on everybody else and easy on yourself. Welcome to AA. We let everyone else off the hook, and you're hard on yourself. This is where you grow up. And, those were hard lessons for me to learn, extremely, extremely hard. And when I see people like that sometimes, it really bothers me because I know what it's like to be like that. And, the one thing that I hate about people in Alcoholics Anonymous, it's their ability to read the future, my future. It really, I swore they didn't have it when I was 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. But everything they predicted came true. Everything. I wound up in a horrific car accident with such horrific damage to a person and myself, it's hard to even imagine. I know what it's like to go to DWI class. I actually looked up to those people in DWI class. They were my kind of drinkers. I remember this guy telling a story where he went through a toll booth for the Triborough Bridge, and the toll collector told him that he was missing his door. I thought that was like the coolest thing I had ever heard. I didn't realize that in AA I had the same problem I had on the street. I was looking up to the wrong people. I was looking up to the people who really didn't take AA seriously. And, you know, I have a lot of, you know, I have a million soapboxes in AA I could get on. You know, my high school yearbook, it says, they have a section, which of course I was too cool to fill out, that says, I predict in 20 years. And there's two about me that people wrote. One says St. John's Hospital will dedicate a wing to Billy N. The other one says Billy N will tear every ligament and break every bone in his body. Now, I thought that was funny at 17 years old. When I looked at that again at my 20th high school reunion, which I was too scared to walk into, by the way, even as many years as I was sober, because I didn't know if I could look those people in the eye. When I walked in there and I'm missing my left kidney, I ruptured that. I'm missing my spleen, I ruptured that. I've had my ribs broken. I mean, unfortunately, I'm a blackout drinker, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, I lose control of every muscle in my body except for my mouth, which is a bad combination, you know? A very bad combination. But I so love the men and women who bring meetings into correctional facilities in Alcoholics Anonymous. I so love the men and women. I mean, my heroes in AA, again, I'm not anti-speaker, my heroes in AA, speakers' jobs are to get people filled with enthusiasm and want to become members of AA. But my heroes are the people who answer the phones at Intergroup and talk people off the ledge and somehow convince them that it would be a good idea to go to a meeting. My heroes are the people who go to detox centers and treatment centers and correctional facilities. Those are my heroes. And, you know, I want to talk the last couple of minutes about my mother and just about my life, because I went to a Joe and Charlie Big Book study. It changed my life. For sure, it did. It changed my life. They described the doctor's opinion and more about alcoholism in a way where I realized I have a fatal disease. Of course, I became a rigid lunatic after that. The rest of AA was no good, only my AA was okay. That doesn't work. It makes you very unpopular in your own social circles. It's much better to wear your sobriety like a loose garment. But I want to talk about my mother and my one brother because, number one, my mom died in 2000. And I just want to tell you possibly one of the most spiritual things I've ever been told in AA. Now, if you've ever dealt with anyone that's in a hospice or in that stage of life, they sometimes hallucinate. You don't really know what they're saying. And on December 24th, 1999, I wrapped my mom's last Christmas gift I would ever give her while my siblings drank in her house, because they can. The next morning I got up. That's Christmas Day, 1999. I got her wig, her Charlie perfume, her radio with her crazy Irish music CDs, her lipstick, a Polaroid picture of her cat, stopped at Dunkin' Donuts on the way and got 2 large coffees, got to her hospital, propped the bed up, jumped up in bed with her, threw back a large coffee with my mother like I might as well have been throwing back a tall boy. And my mom looked at me and said, "You know what, Billy? What AA gave me is the ability to get a quart of milk." And so I didn't understand what the hell she was talking about, to be perfectly honest. But like I said, they go in and out of, and I said, "Mom, what do you mean?" And she said, "When you're the parent of a teenage alcoholic and you run out of something at night, you'll do without rather than go to the store. Because when you go to the store at night, it's not crowded, and you might run into someone you know. And there they're going to ask me the hardest question that anyone can ever ask me, which is, how are your children? Or how is Billy?" And she said what AA gave her was at a certain time in my sobriety, she couldn't wait for someone to ask her that question. She couldn't wait to report the good news of what Alcoholics Anonymous had done for her family. And what's interesting is I have a brother who is the exact opposite of me in many, many ways. Too many. I could give a 3-hour workshop, believe me. But one of the biggest things, I mean, I love the Sandy B line. I'm more the Sandy B alcoholic when he says that the nurse should have taken him from the delivery room right to the detox. That's my story, right? My life would have went much better if the nurse came in and said, hello, Mrs. So-and-so, your son's fine except for one thing, but we have another section of the hospital where we can take him and he'll be fine. I would have been fine going right to detox and treatment. Because I've been a disaster since I've been born. My brother is like Midas, my one brother. He's like everything he touched turned to gold since he was born. By the time he was 31 years old, he had 3 Emmys. He has 6 today. Everything he touches turns to gold. But I want to be very honest about this. I stole his childhood from him I'm not going to say as a result of my drinking, but my alcoholism and my behavior, I stole his childhood, a good portion of it. Because I'm a bully, because I like to humiliate people, because I like to make fun of, because anything different is going to make me feel insecure about myself, so I'm going to make fun of other people. And because he wasn't like me and my other brother and didn't do the things we did and everything else, I made fun of him. And I tell this story because when I first got out of a correctional facility and was going to meetings in New York City, I went to midnight a lot. And I'm going to tell anyone right now, if you're ever in New York City, at the corner of Houston and Varick, every night at midnight, and at 2 a.m. on Fridays and Saturdays, is the Midnight Madness group of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it might not look like pretty AA when you go in there, and you might not get a GSR report, and you might hear a couple of things that sound a little off the wall, but that is MASH unit Alcoholics Anonymous. That is where they somehow have the ability to triage and bandage up people who, by all logic, should not be able to stay sober for a day. And Midnight is somehow able to do that. And a lot of gay men and women go to Midnight. I came to AA racist, sexist, anti-Semitic, homophobic. The list is so long. Again, you can't go out and get a book tonight on healthy family living by my family. And I don't put them down. But I also don't like to be dishonest. Because sometimes I hear people say, it's really hard learning this new way of life. My story is this new way of life is pretty hard, but unlearning the way I was raised, much harder. So hard to do. Those thoughts and ideas that were burned into my head as to how we live and who we hang out with and everything else, I wouldn't even go out to dinner with the gay men and women after midnight because I didn't want to be seen at a table with them. That's the truth. And these were the kind of people who would give you $1 if you didn't have one to put in the basket. These were the kind of people who knew that you hadn't had a job in a long time, and now that you have a new job, you spent your paycheck in 2 hours because you haven't had one in so long. And they'll buy you a cheeseburger or chocolate. I could never buy enough cheeseburgers or chocolate shakes for the rest of my life, no matter how I lived, to pay back the people in AA in New York City and what they did for me. And I remember sometimes walking home and saying, God, what's with all the gay people? Like, what's going on? And, you know, when I was about 4 years sober, my brother Terrence told the family he was gay, and where I come from in my family, that's not exactly a grand announcement, you know? And by that time, you know, what I know, if you're new today, if you're struggling, if something's going on and you can't explain why, only God may have an explanation. That's my experience. You may not have one. My experience is that God put me where I needed to be so that by the time my brother Terrence made that announcement, and he did it just like any good member of my family, if you have a shocking message that's going to really set the rest of the family upside down, you do it at a large party as drunk as possible, right? So he did that, you know. He did it at my sister's Christmas party. And what I can tell you is The truth about that is that AA allowed me to repair my relationship with my brother. See, by the time my brother made that announcement, I knew that my job was to be his brother. All else didn't matter. And over the next 6, 10 years, me and my brother became super close. A relationship that all would say could not be healed. And it's amazing because, his boyfriend came to my office about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, unexpectedly in New York City. And he sat down in the conference room with me and he said, Billy, I've been keeping this a secret, but your brother's been missing for 5 days. And over the last 3 years, it would happen every couple of months, every other month, every couple of weeks, every 2 weeks, every week. And so I can tell you what it's like to go to the missing persons unit and have to fill out a form about your brother. And my brother struggled for a long time to the point where I was at an AA event where he called me and told me he was sitting on the ledge of the London Terrace and that he was going to kill himself because he just couldn't get it together. And that he wanted me to say goodbye to my siblings for him. And I'd love to tell you how tough I am, but the truth is, I had one phone, my phone, begging him not to do anything stupid. I had to borrow somebody else's phone where I'm calling the New York City police, and the dispatcher's telling me to keep him on the line, and waiting to keep him on the line until they crash through his door and grab him and take him to Bellevue. And he's sober today, and what I would tell you is I don't tell that story because I think I had anything to do with saving his life. The reason I tell that story is I really did make his childhood a living hell. And it's amazing that AA is so powerful that it restored our relationship for many years so that when it got to the point where he was in a way when he needed help, he had no problem reaching out to me. That's miraculous. I buried my dad of this disease. He was 63 and looked 93. He was missing one leg from diabetes. His liver was distended, but he wasn't an alcoholic. And, when I travel around for AA sometimes and I meet people, if you have a hard time with a higher power, please just stay. Don't let anyone chase you away. Don't let anyone tell you they have their own brand of AA. And if anyone tells you their AA is better than anyone else's, please run. Please just run as fast as you can away from that person. I don't tell anybody my AA is better. I tell people I have the AA that works for me. And that AA might work for somebody else. But I don't put down other AA. I don't make fun of other AA. I so believe in Bill Wilson's form of AA. That a group's right to be wrong is more important than his right to be right. Well, if it went for him, it goes for me. And so I have no business judging anybody. And when I think about alcoholism in my family and my dad in particular, we don't go to AA. It's just not what we do. It's what quitters do. And I'll say this and I'm going to shut up, that I have an aunt who my whole life as a child was institutionalized. I didn't want to go to my grandmother's funeral when I was 2 years sober because I was afraid to see everybody. I walked into that funeral and my aunt came downstairs to the smoking room and said, Billy, I heard you got sober. Now, she looked like $1 million. I didn't understand it. And she said, I heard you got sober. Is that right? I said, yes, Aunt Sheila, I got sober. She said, is that guy with you from AA? I said, yeah. She goes, the woman upstairs is from my home group. She said, I've been 20-something years sober in AA and abstinent in OA. See, I had known that my aunt went back to college, got her master's, became a doctor in special education, became a dean of a university, but I never knew what happened. And it's so interesting. If you're new, please stay around. Ask people what happened. Whatever your dreams can come true. And if you don't like the AA you go to now, start your own meeting or find AA that works for you. I love the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I was a rigid lunatic at one point. I've had to learn that the big book is the solution. not my highlights, not the different color highlights I have, not the really spiritual notes I have. That's all nice, but the program is the print. The print. The black print. And in the back, in the spiritual appendix, where we always quote, you know, the favorite quote is about contemporary investigation, but I always like to close with my favorite quote. It tells you that only two things can kill us: belligerent denial or intolerance. And it doesn't say intolerance outside of AA. It just says intolerance. And for a guy like me, belligerent denial and intolerance can be my best friend. My life is so much better when I'm tolerant of people. My life is so much better when I leave the rest of the world up to God. My life is so much better, and there's only one thing I have to surrender to. I do not have the power to take the first drink. I can do anything else almost. I can't take the first drink. When I do, the compulsion kicks in. And worse than that, the next day I wake up and my brain tells me it's a good idea to do it all over again. That's insanity. So if you're new tonight, I just want to tell you it is a day-at-a-time program, but it's not a violation to have a plan for tomorrow. It is not like you can't get a ticket for making a plan for what meeting you could go to tomorrow. It's okay to even meet somebody tonight, get their phone number, and make a plan to talk to them tomorrow. Like if you're new, even if you don't like the word sponsor, just get someone else's number. And if you're new, I had to learn the hardest lesson I've ever learned is that I'm a taker. And that takers don't get sober. And that if you give 51% more than you take, a guy like me has a chance to get sober. So I really wish the intergroup here well. I love intergroups. I love people that answer phones. I love people that are the gatekeepers of the new people coming in Alcoholics Anonymous who somehow get that person through some miracle to their first meeting. There's no more important work that we do. So thank you very much.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst and one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down. and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.